What's up, Texas A&M fans? Joseph Hastings from GigEm 24/7 here with Carter Karels. So I'm out here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Carter's down there at Kyle Field right after Texas A&M's 31-9 victory over Mississippi State to improve to 5-0 on the season, 2-0 in conference play. Carter, you were there. It was the blackout game, a lot of energy. Can you just take me through it, what you saw, your overall thoughts on A&M improving to 5-0?
Yeah, 31-9. Got to give it to this defense. That's the biggest takeaway for me here. It's the second straight week that this defense has put together an awesome performance. You look at the rushing totals, right? Like they held their opponent under 100 again. They got a bunch of sacks. Cassius Howell, really the main guy that we got to talk about. I mean, 3 sacks today. Brings him to 7 on the season. I tweeted this. He has more sacks now through 5 games than Shamar Stewart and Nick Scorton had combined all of last year. The guy is having a monstrous season, and really you got to start talking about him as a first-round pick now because he has really put it together. And he could have more sacks. That's the thing is like. And the interception that Damian Samper had, he was the one who tipped the ball at the line of scrimmage. The guy is just on a heater right now. He was a guy we talked about of if there's anyone on this defense to really break out and be a superstar this year, it'd be Cassius Howell, and he has. Damian Samford, another guy who, got his opportunity when Scooby Williams went down with his ankle injury, and for a second straight week, another great performance. Had a sack, had a couple of TFLs, 9 tackles, and his interception. Just really got to give him a shout out because, for a backup to come in and do that, that's a guy that could start at a lot of different programs. And so kudos to him. And again, just what a performance for this defense. We'll talk about the offense in a bit, but got to give them their flowers because it wasn't a great start to the season, but now, my gosh, it has really become a strength for this team.
I think the thing that we were talking about after they beat Auburn last week and, seeing what they were able to do, holding them to 10 points, 7 of those coming after an interception was returned to the 2-yard line. So they really did their part throughout most of that game. And then seeing them follow it up here at Mississippi State, the question we were asking last week was, were we going to get the Texas A&M defense we saw against Notre Dame and, in the first couple of weeks at times, or were we going to get the defense that we saw against Auburn? And we got that defense against Auburn, and it's really paying dividends for this program because that offense was not clicking in the first half and even in parts of the second half, and the defense kind of carried the way. And, when it seemed like Mississippi State was going to get some momentum going, the defense took over and prevented them from really being able to take over.
Yeah, and like you think about that first drive, and it didn't look great for the defense. Like they were running the ball down their throat. Booth had that run where, he got the turf monster. It really should have been like a 67-yard touchdown, but he gets stopped for, I think, like a 22-yard gain because he trips up. After that drive, that opening drive, they really, the only play that was, a bad play they gave up was that Brennan Thompson touchdown against a Des Ricks in coverage. At that point, what was it, 28-3? So the game was really out of hand at that point. So, Des Ricks has been excellent all season. So, I guess maybe eventually, something had to happen. But after that start, you kind of wondered like, hey, like what's going to happen here? But they really started to take over. And something Mike Elko talked in his press conference was, a lot of offenses have kind of game planned this defense where, a lot of runs to the edge, a lot of quick throws, not a lot of drop back and passing for, several seconds, right? Well, we've seen Auburn and Mississippi State kind of go away from that where they drop back and pass. And both of those teams, have pretty, meh, if not bad offensive lines. And A&M really took advantage of that. They were in the backfield all night tonight, making Blake Shapen's life miserable. And, if you're not going to do the whole quick pass thing, this defensive line is going to feast. And again, it speaks to what a difference a year makes. You think about last year, they lose their top three defensive linemen. They don't really have a lot of superstars on paper. Cassius Howe wasn't even preseason All SEC. And didn't have any preseason All SEC guys up front. And yet they're probably going to be in the top five in the country in sacks nationally. It just speaks to the jobs that Mike Elko and Jay Bateman and Wyatt Hemphill have done with that group. It also speaks to how some of these guys are playing. Like we mentioned, Cassius Howe, but Dayon Hayes has been great. Albert Regis has been great. Tyler Onyedim. A lot of guys on that front have really crushed their expectations and done an excellent job.
Yeah, and Texas A&M's defense, at all three levels is really starting to pick up over the past couple of weeks. And I think in the second half, we saw a little bit of what this A&M program can become when both sides of the ball are clicking together. The offense scores 24 points, defense holds them to 6. You mentioned that touchdown there when the game was pretty much out of reach. I think that's really a sign of what A&M, when everything's clicking, what they can be. Can you talk a little bit about that second half? Anything that you saw differently from the offense's perspective, and what really kind of
Yeah.
opened it up for them?
Yeah, it wasn't a great first half. And I think there are a couple things at play. For one, Le'Veon Moss went down about early to mid second quarter, came out of the game you know, for much of the game. I mean, he only really had a couple carries after that. And they had to turn to Reuben Owens. And, up to that point, they probably weren't running the ball enough. I mean, they come out of the gate, their first three runs go for 31 yards, and then they just decide, hey, we're going to start throwing it now. And it just didn't work. Marcel Reed was not in a rhythm early on. A lot of deep balls, and, it just hasn't really worked for him this season. Hasn't really been a strength of his. And so you kind of hoped, like, okay, maybe establish the run more, maybe do some more quick passes where you can kind of get him in rhythm more. And that's what they did. I really felt like midway through the third quarter and onward, I think they came out first drive, didn't really do a whole lot to begin the second half, but middle third quarter onward, they started to get it to their guys. Mike Elko even talked about it after the game. Not a lot of stuff over the middle. It was a lot of, screens and things to the flat, to the edges, and letting guys like Mario Craver cook. They also did a lot of jet sweeps with their receivers today, like Casey Concepcion, Mario Craver. It's something we really haven't seen from this offense. And, they also did a lot of those kind of fake out motions where, yeah, it's going to open up the running game a little bit more for the running backs. And, I got to give a lot of credit to Reuben Owens. He's a guy that had a ton of expectations as a former 5-star recruit. Came in his freshman year, showed some flashes. Last year, just completely derailed by a Liz Frank fracture, a really unfortunate thing for him. And then Le'Veon Moss kind of takes control of the backfield. And he kind of became not quite an afterthought, but just not someone you thought of that would be running for 100 yards in a game like this.
Mm-hmm.
He takes over, and, I asked Mike Elko about it after the game. He said, like, okay, Owens was playing so well that Moss, they really didn't feel like they needed to risk it. He's kind of dinged up with some things, and they didn't feel like they needed to really turn to Moss at that point in the second half. So they kind of rode Owens, and it's a good sign for, the reason that, hey, Moss will be back next week. He'll be good to go. But also Reuben Owens finally becoming kind of that guy that we thought he was as a recruit. His easily his best performance that he's had. And so, offensively, it took a second from them to click. And then I really felt like they hit their rhythm midway through the third quarter and onwards.
And let's stick with the offense real quickly because I want to get your thoughts on this. The Marcel Reed had 23 pass attempts, the rushing attack over 50 attempts there. So definitely heavily relying on the run, especially when you saw that Marcel really didn't have it kind of going in that first half. Is that kind of the recipe for this A&M team here, especially with how the defense is playing? Being able to control the clock with the ground game. You're not really going to be going up against a lot of explosive offenses, in the coming weeks. Is that kind of the recipe for them to go with?
Well, I think it's more of a hot hand situation where you roll with whatever's working. I mean, both have been very effective this year. You've had like the first couple games where they kind of sell out against the run, and then, okay, we're just going to give it to Mario Craver and Casey Concepcion then. And then, You had the game last week where maybe the opportunities weren't there as much for Craver, and so they really pounded the rock. We saw it today where they pounded the rock more. I mentioned that like they were probably throwing a little bit too much early, but once they shifted and started running the ball, I mean, they had like a 16, 17 play drive where they ran it like 13 or 14 times. They were heavily leaning on that running game, even despite Moss, not really being in the mix. And so I think it's just a matter of what's working for you. And like, I want to point out one thing that happened in the first half that I felt like was huge to kind of spring this team forward was that Casey Concepcion touchdown.
Yeah.
Things hadn't really been working offensively. Uh, he gets into the 2 yard line and drags the defender in, and that's just who he is. He is that guy that's hard to bring down and can give you some energy offensively. Whether you give him a jet sweep, uh, he gets that catch radius going where he's bringing in crazy catches. What he does after the catch, he's just a guy that I feel like can really spring you offensively. And even though they didn't do a whole lot in the first half, it brought them ahead. It brought them in a point where they're up 7-3. They get the ball to start the second half. And then you started to see Craver get going in that second half. Big game for him against his former team. And it took him a second, but he started to get going. And once Craver and Concepcion are going, and the running game's going, I mean, this offense, I mean, how do you defend it? What do you stop? What do you pick? It's pick your poison with who you stop. And, I think Marcel Reed at one point was 1 of 7 from on passes of 15 plus yards. And then there got to a point where it seemed like he was completing everything. He was like 8 of 10 at one point, there late in the game where he just, really found a rhythm there. And I think that's the key for this offense is just, look, Marcel Reed doesn't need to be a superhero. He doesn't need to be throwing 40-yard bombs every day. Now, if they're wide open, right, like, of course you're going to throw them. But there was a lot that he was throwing today that, didn't even need to be thrown, right? Like, these guys maybe aren't open in certain situations. You even think about the interception he threw to Theo Millen Ostrom. Maybe open early in the route down the seam, but by the time he threw it, not only was it not open, but he also sailed it over his head, and it was an easy interception. So you don't need to press and make these huge plays down the field. You just got to get these guys in space. You got to establish the run and really just take what that defense gives you. And I think that's what they did midway through the third and onward.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. He definitely seemed to be lacking some confidence there, like double clutching with some of his throws,
Yeah.
not really getting his feet set. And I think in the second half, like you said, they were able to get him comfortable, just lean into the ground game. And you really saw that offense that we had been seeing the first 3 weeks that was just not really there against Auburn due to, self-inflicted errors, what did that be? Play calling, turnovers, penalties, what have you. The penalties, that is something, I want to get your quick thoughts on that, especially
Yeah.
in that first drive there. It's just like, killer. Maybe it doesn't hurt you this game against Mississippi State,
Yep.
but on the road against an LSU or on the road against Missouri, I know Texas didn't look that well today and so far this season, but you go on the road, to end the year, that's gonna be something that could bite you. So I want to get your thoughts just real quickly here on the penalty situation with A&M.
Yeah, I've got to kind of track my brain thinking about some of them. I know like first drive they had 3,
Yeah.
and after all the talk of the coaches Cabo fun, I was thinking, man, they might be going to Cabo tonight because there's going to be a lot of contributions. 6 after the first drive, is that great? No. Is it maybe an improvement? Yes. It's one of those 6 I thought was a pretty bad holding penalty that was called on Jordan Shaw on that long kickoff return or punt return
Yeah.
from Casey Concepcion. That was not a holding. Like, come on, let's be serious, guys. That was not a holding. Mike Elko was losing his mind at the ref, pointing at the video board saying, look at that. That is not a holding.
Mhm.
And so you had situations like that, but the false starts, remain kind of an issue. They had a whole bunch against Notre Dame, had a couple last week. It's really, we've talked to Mike Elko about this. It's the pre-snap and it's the post-snap, right? Or not post-snap, post-play. So false starts, illegal procedures, illegal. I think they had an illegal substitution, which is probably on the coaches there tonight. The post snap, the unnecessary roughness kind of penalties, the late hits, the roughing the passer, that kind of stuff. There was a big roughing the passer tonight with DJ Hicks. People might question that, but hey, he hit the quarterback's helmet a little bit late, and anytime you hit a quarterback in the head, even if you don't bring him down, that's a roughing the passer. Now, it ended up being made amends because they got an interception on literally the very next play. But on that play, had he not done that, it would have brought up 4th and 6, and they would have been fine. So, there's a couple here and there, but it didn't feel as egregious and as just crazy as the last couple weeks. So a little bit of an improvement, but still needs to be better for sure.
I think one thing also that we shouldn't gloss over is, this is a Mississippi State team that, had just played Tennessee, tough game. I know it was at home, but they played them well, took them to overtime. They'd beaten Arizona State earlier in the year. We knew they weren't, a world beater, they weren't ranked or anything like that, but I expected a little bit, of a closer final score than what it
Oh,
ended up being. I think that's something that we shouldn't look over, and just kind
yeah.
of leading that into Florida, which is a team that, I guess, could also be looked, you look ahead to maybe a couple of the other games coming up later this month. But you got to focus on this one here. You got one final game at Kyle Field before you have a whole month without playing a home game. Can you talk a little bit about, just the momentum generated, especially in that second half and leading that into the Florida game?
Yeah, it's a good point that, when you end the game the way that A&M did, it hopefully bleeds into the next week and kind of gives you more hope. Like, you think about last week, not a lot of momentum at the end of that Auburn game. It's just kind of like, whew, they kind of escaped with that one.
Yeah.
But this time, I mean, you're feeling as good as you felt all season. I mean, like you said, Mississippi State, they beat a good Arizona State team. They went toe to toe with Tennessee. We'll
Mhm.
see where they are at the end of the season, but you have to feel pretty good about that performance. And Florida is going to be a really interesting one to me because at 2-3, you think, oh, they're not that good. Billy Napier's on the hot seat, all this. They did just beat Texas today.
Yeah.
I thought they looked pretty good. Now, we've said this before, probably, but Texas probably not as good as a lot of people thought. Preseason #1, I always thought that was kind of crazy with all the questions they had coming in the season, and all the just how unproven Arch Manning was up to this stage. But
Mhm.
still, for Florida to do what they did, it shows you that there's not a lot of easy games in the SEC. And I felt like I just kind of watched most of the first 3 quarters. They were pushing Texas around at times. They were running the ball really well, and their defense looked pretty dang good. And so they're not a scrub. This is not a team that of course they lost to South Florida, but this is not a team that you can take lightly per se. DJ Lagway, of course, has he panned out the way that people hoped yet? No, but he still has that potential in him. He's still young. He still has had some games where he's played extremely well. So not a game you can take lightly. Not a game you can have a whole bunch of penalties, but still like to still think you'd love A&M's chances going into that one at home, and with the way that this team has really come together on both sides of the football lately.
Yeah, it just depends on, is the A&M like offense and defense going to be clicking together throughout all 4 quarters?
Yeah.
Kind of just projecting a little bit here. Kind of feels like it could be a little bit like an Auburn type situation where I'm not really too sold on Florida's offense. I know they did put up 29
Yeah.
points against Texas today, but I haven't seen enough from them earlier this season to make me think that's going to be something that you'll see consistently from them. The defense is definitely, legitimate. Even when they were losing, and playing against Miami, playing against LSU, the defense definitely did enough
Yep.
to hold up. So that's going to be something that we watch. And looking at first 5 games of the season, I think I asked you this last week, but just what are just kind of your overall thoughts here on where A&M is at now, coming off this win? Maybe looking ahead, not only just to Florida, but that 3 game road stretch after. Just what's the spot that A&M's in now right now?
Well, I think the confidence just grows every week. It's you're 5-0 now. We've kind of talked about these next couple games, kind of that cutoff of like, hey, you could be 7-0 going
Yeah.
into Death Valley at LSU, an LSU team that doesn't look as good as people thought. We talked about Texas not looking as good as people thought. Florida, South Carolina, it's so wide open for this A&M team. And again, in the playoff era, you only got to go 10-2 in the SEC, and you're in.
Hmm.
So you just have to love where A&M is at right now. I don't know if you could feel as optimistic about A&M at this point in the season than maybe since the 2020 season, where it was just such a great year from after that Bama game and onward.
Yeah.
This A&M team is just rolling at this point, and everything seems set up well for them. Um, I think for them, like you said, it's about kind of putting together those four quarters. It's about complementary football. I think we saw that there last quarter and a half.
Yeah.
Can they carry that through? If they can, I mean, there's maybe not a better team in college football right now when they're playing complementary football. I do the Super 16 poll every week for Football Writers Association of America. I had A&M at 6 last week. Uh, I'm tempted to put them top 3 now. I really feel like this team is just putting it together. And you look at some of these other teams in the country, Oregon and Ohio State, I feel like they've differentiated themselves. But beyond those two, I mean, how many teams can say they're better than Texas A&M right now and have shown more than Texas A&M? Still some hard games coming up.
Yeah.
We mentioned LSU, Missouri. I there might be an argument that Missouri is the toughest game on A&M's schedule right now,
Mhm.
which is pretty crazy to think about. But yeah, the optimism is high, and I think it's going to be tough to beat this football team this season.
You mentioned the optimism being high. This is going to be my last question to you here. Just kind of wrapping up, and any parting thoughts, especially after speaking with Elko and some of the players tonight. Just on the overall vibe of the A&M program, and anything else that you'd like to add there.
Well, I think there's a lot of confidence from Elko. I think he's feeling really good about his team right now. And one thing maybe we haven't mentioned is the crowd tonight. Another phenomenal crowd for A&M, the fifth largest in Kyle Field history. Last week was the sixth largest, so I guess now it's the seventh largest. I think in Elko's time here, 6 of the 9 largest crowds in Kyle Field history, 6 of the 9 have come under Mike Elko. I think this fan base is really starting to believe in this team. I think, he's joked about a battered Aggie syndrome and sort of the misery that A&M fans have carried for many years. This expectation that hey, at some point they're going to choke, or at some point things aren't going to go right, or there's going to be an injury, or something's going to go wrong. And he hasn't shied away. He said, hey, stop with it. Stop getting so pessimistic. Get excited. And I think you see the crowd tonight. You see the crowds this program is bringing in, and just sort of the chatter ever since that Notre Dame game just feels like the confidence has just built and built and built. And you're seeing these players play with it. They're not, playing like a team that's feeling themselves and is getting too big for their britches.
Mhm.
Felt like they were last year. Felt like South Carolina, Auburn, Texas. There's some games last year where just felt like they didn't have it. But this year, even when they don't play well, they respond every time, and have put together a few really good performances now through this season.
By the way, speaking of the crowd tonight, do you like the blackout? Do you like continuing that and just kind of the
Yeah.
vibe, the energy that you saw tonight?
Love it, man. It's such one thing that Mike Elko's done since taking over is kind of transformed the media team and the sort of the vibe. You know, Under Jimbo Fisher at A&M, 6 seasons, I think they wore alternate uniforms one time. I think it
Hmm.
was Kentucky in 2018. So like literally his last 5 years, they did not wear an alternate uniform, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
seems like they're wearing an alternate uniform, like a whole bunch. And people have opinions on that. Do you want to do that? Like, I don't know. Like a couple weeks ago when they're wearing all maroon, I'm like, just wear your basics. Like all maroon, that's whatever. But like the all black, like that's freaking cool.
yeah,
Seeing the crowd in all black, it's kind of disorienting because you're so used to seeing the maroon. So
yeah.
you look out and the crowd, you see the all black, and you're like, am I at a funeral? Like, what is going on here? And just seeing the media team really play with it with sort of the black and white graphics all week, and Marcel Reed doing the uniform reveal at
That was
the
good.
the fire school, like that was so cool. And hey, college football is meant to be fun. Like, let's have fun. Let's you know uh, give these players a chance to really show off their personalities and have a blast. So I'm all for it. And it's just a lot more exciting, and I feel like the fans really leaned into it this week.
Good stuff, Carter. As always, look forward to being back out there at Kyle Field with you next week for the Florida game. Should be very exciting. And definitely look forward to seeing this A&M program here for the final time at Kyle Field this month. It feels like it's just crazy how the stretch could be like that. Schedule wise to have three consecutive road games and then the bye week there too. So it's gonna be a while. We're gonna enjoy it. But thank you for joining me here. Thank you everyone who tuned in. Be sure to like and subscribe to the GigEm 24/7 YouTube page. For GigEm 24/7, this is Joseph Hastings, Carter Karels. See you all next week.